While I was at the hospital recovering from surgery, my wife's father, the boss, texted me, "You're fired. We have already cleared out your desk. We don't need unreliable employees like you." I was lying next to the CEO of his biggest competitor, who had also just undergone surgery. I showed him the text and negotiated my new position. My wife's dad got hysterical when, you know that moment when you're lying in a hospital bed, feeling sorry for yourself because you've got more tubes sticking out of you than a science experiment gone wrong, and you think to yourself, well, at least things can't get any worse. Yeah, well, the universe apparently took that as a personal challenge. There I was, trying to figure out if the mystery meat they called dinner was actually edible or just some cruel joke the kitchen staff played on patients, when my phone decided to light up like a Christmas tree. Now, most people would probably ignore it. I mean, I'm literally connected to machines that beep every 5 seconds to remind me I'm still breathing. But apparently, my masochistic tendencies were stronger than my common sense. The text was from Charles Whitford, my boss, my father-in-law, the man who'd given me his blessing to marry his daughter and then spent the next 7 years treating me like I was some kind of corporate parasite he couldn't quite shake off. The message was short, sweet, and about as warm as a Minnesota winter. You're fired. We've already cleared out your desk. We don't need unreliable employees like you. I stared at that screen for a solid minute, wondering if maybe the pain meds were making me hallucinate. Nope. The words were still there, glowing like a neon sign advertising my professional doom. 7 years. 7 goddamn years of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, and kissing ass so hard I could probably write a manual on advanced brown-nosing techniques. All of it flushed down the drain with one text message that had less emotion than a grocery list. The timing was just chef's kiss perfect. Here I am, fresh out of emergency surgery. Nothing too dramatic, just my appendix deciding to go rogue and try to kill me. With stitches holding my gut together like a poorly sewn teddy bear, and this absolute gem of a human being decides now is the perfect time to drop the professional equivalent of a nuclear bomb on my life. I mean, I get it. Charles never really liked me. I wasn't the Ivy League golden boy he'd probably envisioned for his precious daughter Claire. I was just some state school graduate who'd worked his way up through sheer stubborn determination and an unhealthy relationship with caffeine. But firing me while I'm literally hooked up to an 4-drip? That takes a special kind of creativity in the cruelty department. The really beautiful part? The unreliable employee comment. Apparently, nearly dying from a burst appendix makes you unreliable in Charles's book. I should have just toughed it out, right? Maybe died at my desk like a proper corporate drone. Would have saved him the trouble of firing me, I guess. I was still processing this masterpiece of passive-aggressive destruction when I noticed the guy in the bed next to me. Silver hair, sharp eyes that looked like they'd seen more boardroom battles than most people see Netflix shows, and an air about him that screamed, I could buy and sell you before breakfast. He was pretending to read some financial magazine, but I could tell he was watching me out of the corner of his eye. Rough day at the office? He asked, his voice carrying that gravelly quality that comes from years of barking orders and probably smoking cigars in rooms where smoking cigars was definitely not allowed. I held up my phone, still displaying Charles's literary masterpiece. My father-in-law just fired me. Via text. While I'm in the hospital. The guy's eyebrows shot up so fast I thought they might achieve orbit. That's impressive. In the worst possible way. Yeah, well, Charles Whitford isn't known for his sensitivity training. And that's when something shifted in my temporary roommate's expression. A spark of recognition, followed by what I could only describe as predatory interest, like a shark that had just caught the scent of blood in the water. Charles Whitford, of Holstrom and Associates. The one and only. Why, you know him. The guy's smile could have powered a small city. Oh, we've met. Victor Hale, Summit Analytics. He extended his hand, and when I shook it, I felt like I was signing some kind of cosmic contract I didn't fully understand yet. Summit Analytics. Holy shit. I'd just been fired by my father-in-law in front of his biggest competitor. The universe's sense of irony was apparently operating at peak efficiency today. Well, Victor said, settling back into his pillow with the satisfied look of a cat who'd just spotted a particularly fat mouse. This is interesting. Interesting didn't even begin to cover it. Here I was, professionally destroyed, physically held together with medical-grade thread and tape, lying next to the one person in the entire business world who'd probably pay good money to watch Charles Whitford suffer. It was like finding out your worst enemy's biggest rival was your new neighbor, except instead of borrowing sugar, we were talking about corporate warfare. The machines around me kept beeping their electronic symphony. The hospital smell of disinfectant and despair filled my nostrils, and my phone sat silent on the bedside table like a loaded weapon. But for the first time since I'd woken up from surgery, I wasn't thinking about the stitches in my gut or the fact that hospital gowns were clearly designed by someone who hated human dignity. I was thinking about possibilities. Charles thought he'd kick me while I was down. Thought he'd timed it perfectly to crush whatever fight I had left in me. But looking at Victor Hale's knowing smile and feeling the first stirrings of something that might have been hope, or maybe just really good pain medication, I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Charles had made the biggest mistake of his miserable life. Game on, you magnificent bastard. So there I was, staring at this silver-haired guy who'd just introduced himself as the business equivalent of Darth Vader to Charles's Luke Skywalker, except in this twisted version, Vader was actually the good guy. Or at least the guy who wasn't a complete asshole. The jury was still out on that one. Victor Hale, Summit Analytics. The name that made Charles's eye twitch every time it came up in conversation. Which, let me tell you, was more often than you'd think. Charles had this weird obsession with Summit, like a high school quarterback who couldn't get over losing the big game 20 years ago. Except instead of reminiscing about glory days, Charles spent board meetings bitching about those corporate raiders and their unethical business practices. Rich, coming from a guy who'd just fired his son-in-law via text message from a hospital bed, Victor was still looking at me with that shark smile, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head. This wasn't just coincidence anymore. This was opportunity dressed up in a hospital gown and hooked to an 4-drip. Bad news? He asked again, nodding toward my phone. But the way he said it suggested he already knew exactly how bad it was. There's something about powerful people. They can smell weakness and opportunity from a mile away, like bloodhounds with expense accounts. I glanced down at Charles's masterpiece of modern communication still glowing on my screen. The words hadn't changed, unfortunately. Still the same soul-crushing, professionally devastating message that had the emotional warmth of a restraining order. Oh, you know, I said, waving my phone like it was Exhibit A in a murder trial. Just your typical Tuesday morning career assassination. Nothing too dramatic. Victor chuckled, and it was the kind of sound that probably made his competitors break out in cold sweats. Mind if I take a look? Professional curiosity. What the hell, right? My dignity was already somewhere in the hospital's biohazard disposal system along with my appendix. Might as well share the wealth. I tilted the phone toward him, watching his expression as he read Charles's literary abortion. His eyebrows climbed higher with each word, and by the time he finished, he was shaking his head like he'd just witnessed someone kick a puppy while simultaneously stealing candy from a baby. We don't need unreliable employees like you, he read aloud, his voice dripping with the kind of disdain usually reserved for people who put pineapple on pizza. That takes a special kind of cruelty. Even by corporate standards, that's impressively heartless. Yeah, well, Charles has always been an overachiever when it comes to being a dick. Victor's laugh was genuine this time. Not the calculated corporate chuckle, but actual amusement. You know, I've been dealing with Charles Whitford for over a decade, and he never ceases to amaze me. Just when I think he's reached peak asshole, he finds new depths to plumb. I was starting to like this guy. Sure, he was probably as ruthless as they come in the business world, but at least he had the decency to recognize quality dickishness when he saw it. So you two have history, I said, trying to sound casual while internally doing backflips at the cosmic comedy of the situation. Oh, we have history, all right, Victor said, and there was a story there. A big one, judging by the way his expression shifted from amused to something darker. Let's just say Charles and I have fundamentally different philosophies about business, and ethics, and basic human decency. That's when I noticed the admission papers at the foot of his bed. They'd been sitting there the whole time, but I'd been too busy wallowing in my own professional misery to pay attention. Now, seeing his name printed in that sterile hospital font, the full weight of the situation hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo load of irony. Victor Hale, CEO of Summit Analytics. The man Charles spent more time bitching about than he did actually running his own company. And here he was, lying in the bed next to mine, reading about my humiliation in real time like it was his personal entertainment system. I started, then stopped, because what do you even say in a situation like this? This is incredibly weird. Weird doesn't even begin to cover it, Victor agreed. Your father-in-law just fired you in front of his greatest business rival. That's either cosmic justice or cosmic comedy. I'm leaning toward both. The more I thought about it, the funnier it got. Charles, in all his infinite wisdom, had chosen to deliver his coup de grace at the exact moment and place where it would cause him the maximum amount of professional embarrassment. It was like he'd planned it, except Charles wasn't nearly smart enough to plan something this perfectly self-destructive. You know what the best part is? I said, feeling a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep in my chest. He probably thinks he's taught me some kind of lesson. Like I'm going to lie here feeling sorry for myself and then crawl back begging for forgiveness. Are you? Victor asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. Hell no. I mean, don't get me wrong. This sucks. 7 years of my life down the drain. My wife's going to flip when she finds out her dad fired me. And I'm probably going to have to explain to my mortgage company why my income just disappeared. But crawl back to Charles? I'd rather eat hospital food for the rest of my life. Victor's smile was back, and this time it had teeth. Good. Because men like Charles Whitford count on people being too afraid to fight back. They build their empires on intimidation and the assumption that everyone else is too weak or too scared to stand up to them. And you're not. Kid, I've been standing up to Charles Whitford since before you knew he existed. The difference is, I have the resources to make it interesting. There was a promise in those words, hanging in the antiseptic air between us like a dare. I could feel something shifting, some fundamental change in the trajectory of my life that started with a text message and was now pointing toward, what? Revenge? Justice? Professional suicide? Maybe all three. Victor, I said, testing out his name. I think this might be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. He laughed, and it was the sound of possibilities opening up like flowers in spring. Oh, I'm counting on it. The thing about loyalty is that it's supposed to be a two-way street, not a one-way ticket to getting screwed over by your own family. But apparently, nobody sent Charles that memo. For 7 goddamn years, I'd been the poster child for corporate devotion, the kind of employee who showed up early, stayed late, and treated client relationships like sacred bonds that couldn't be broken. And where did it get me? A pink slip delivered via text message while I was hooked up to medical equipment like some kind of corporate Frankenstein's monster. Victor was quiet for a while after our little bonding moment, probably processing the beautiful irony of the situation. Me? I was lying there thinking about all those times Charles had pulled me aside with his friendly advice about staying in my lane and not getting too cozy with the competition. You're too trusting, he'd say, adjusting his tie like some kind of corporate peacock. These clients, they'll sweet-talk you, make you think you're irreplaceable, but at the end of the day, they're loyal to Holstrom and Associates, not to you personally. What a load of bullshit that turned out to be. The truth was, Charles had always been paranoid about my relationships with clients. Not because I was bad at my job. Hell no, I was fucking excellent at my job, but because I was too good at it. Clients didn't just tolerate me. They actually liked me. They trusted me. They called me directly instead of going through the company switchboard. And that scared the living hell out of Charles because it meant I had something he couldn't control. Genuine professional relationships built on competence and trust instead of fear and corporate hierarchy. He was always worried about you getting too close to competitors, wasn't he? Victor said, like he was reading my mind. Which, given his reputation for corporate espionage, competitive intelligence gathering, maybe he was. Paranoid doesn't even begin to cover it, I said, shifting in the hospital bed and immediately regretting it as my stitches reminded me they were still very much a thing. Every time I had lunch with a client, every networking event, every industry conference, Charles acted like I was one handshake away from defecting to the enemy. And now he's thrown me away in the exact place where it hurts him most. It's like he wanted to prove his own worst fears were justified. Victor's smile was the kind that probably gave his competitors nightmares. Charles doesn't understand loyalty because he's never inspired it. He confuses fear with respect, intimidation with leadership. But your clients, They don't see you as replaceable, do they? That hit home like a punch to the gut, except in a good way. Because Victor was right. My clients didn't give a shit about Holstrom and Associates. They cared about results, and I was the one who delivered them. When Angela Torres at Northridge Manufacturing had a crisis at 2 a.m., she didn't call the company hotline. She called me. When Meridian Logistics needed someone to untangle their supply chain nightmare, they didn't ask for whoever's available. They asked for me specifically. I'd built those relationships one conversation, one solution, one late-night crisis call at a time. Charles might own the company name on the letterhead, but those clients? They were mine in every way that actually mattered. Son of a bitch, I muttered, the realization hitting me like a freight train. He didn't fire me. He freed me. Now you're getting it, Victor said, looking like a proud teacher whose student had just figured out calculus. Charles wanted you humiliated and weak. Instead, he's just eliminated the one thing that was keeping you tied to his sinking ship. The more I thought about it, the more brilliant Charles's stupidity became. For years, I'd stayed at Holstrom because of misplaced loyalty, family obligation, and the comfortable inertia of a steady paycheck. I'd turned down headhunter calls, ignored better offers, and stuck with Charles's increasingly dysfunctional operation because I thought I owed him something. But loyalty to what? To a man who'd just demonstrated that 7 years of dedication meant less to him than his own petty need for control? To a company that treated me like a replaceable cog instead of the revenue-generating machine I actually was? Fuck that noise. You know what the really beautiful part is? I said, feeling something that might have been hope creeping into my voice for the first time in hours. All those client relationships he was so paranoid about, they're not going anywhere. Angela Torres doesn't trust Holstrom and Associates. She trusts me. Same with Marcus Webb at Eastmont, Jennifer Chun at Pacific Systems, hell, half my client roster. Victor was practically purring with satisfaction. And what do you think happens when those clients find out Charles fired the one person they actually want to work with? I started laughing, which probably looked insane given that I was lying in a hospital bed with tubes sticking out of me, but I couldn't help it. The cosmic justice of it all was too perfect. Charles had spent years worrying that his clients were more loyal to me than to his company, and instead of trying to earn that loyalty himself, he'd just eliminated me from the equation. It was like a jealous husband getting rid of his wife's lover by burning down his own house. Sure, the lover was gone, but now everybody was homeless and pissed off. He's going to lose them, I said, the certainty of it settling in my chest like warm whiskey. Maybe not all of them right away, but the important ones, the profitable ones. They're going to take one look at whatever corporate drone he assigns to replace me and start shopping around for alternatives. And where do you think they'll start shopping? I looked at Victor, this silver-haired shark in a hospital gown who'd just been handed the business opportunity of a lifetime on a silver platter, courtesy of my idiot father-in-law's spectacular miscalculation. Wherever I land next, I said, and for the first time since that text message had blown up my world, I felt powerful again. Charles thought he'd buried me. Instead, he'd just planted the seeds of his own destruction, and I was going to water them with every client relationship he'd been too stupid to value. The next morning came way too early, announced by the familiar symphony of beeping machines and the breakfast cart squeaking down the hallway like a rusty harbinger of whatever culinary nightmare they were calling food today. I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, my mind racing between righteous anger and the slowly dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, Charles had done me the biggest favor of my professional life. Victor was already awake when I turned my head, propped up in his bed with a notepad balanced on his knees, scribbling away like some kind of boardroom general planning his next campaign. The guy looked like he could run a Fortune 500 company from a park bench, let alone a hospital bed. There was something almost intimidating about watching him work, the focused intensity, the way his pen moved across the paper with surgical precision. Jesus, do you ever stop working? I asked, my voice still rough from sleep and whatever industrial-strength pain medication they'd been pumping into my system. He glanced up, and that shark smile was back in full force. Sleep is for people who don't have billion-dollar companies to run. Besides, I had some thinking to do about our conversation yesterday. Our conversation. Right. The part where I'd basically had my entire professional life implode in front of Charles's biggest competitor. I was starting to feel like a character in some twisted corporate fairy tale, Except instead of finding a glass slipper, I'd found myself on the radar of a man who could probably buy and sell small countries before lunch. How many accounts did you handle at Holstrom? Victor asked, his pen poised over the notepad like he was conducting some kind of informal interview. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if this was the kind of information I should be sharing with the enemy. But then I remembered that Charles had already declared me the enemy. So what was the point of corporate loyalty to a company that had just kicked me to the curb? 9 major clients, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. It was weird, reducing 7 years of my life to a simple number. Combined annual revenue of about 42 million. Victor's eyebrow shot up so fast I thought it might achieve escape velocity. 42 million? And they all dealt with you personally. That's how I work. Or worked. Whatever. The past tense felt like a knife twist. I don't believe in the corporate buffer zone bullshit. You want results, you build relationships. You want relationships, you show up, you deliver, and you don't hide behind company policies when shit hits the fan. And they trusted you personally? Not just the Holstrom name? I thought about Angela Torres calling me at midnight when her production line went down, about Marcus Webb inviting me to his daughter's wedding, about Jennifer Chin asking for my advice on her company's expansion plans. These weren't just business relationships. They were partnerships built on mutual respect and proven results. Yeah, I said, and the certainty in my voice surprised me. They trusted me. Hell, half the time I think they forgot I even worked for Holstrom. I was just their guy. Victor set down his pen and leaned forward, and suddenly the air in the room felt charged with possibility. And what do you think would happen if their guy suddenly wasn't tied to Charles Whitford's sinking ship anymore? The question hung between us like a loaded gun. I knew what he was getting at, of course. It wasn't exactly rocket science. But hearing it out loud, having someone else acknowledge what I'd been thinking all night, made it feel real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. They'd follow, I said, the words coming out quieter than I'd intended. Maybe not all of them, but the important ones. The ones who matter. Join Summit. The offer hit me like a lightning bolt, simple and direct and completely life-changing. No corporate dancing around. No bullshit about exploring opportunities or seeing what develops. Just a straight-up, no-nonsense proposition that could flip my entire world upside down. I can give you authority, freedom, and backing, Victor continued, his voice steady and sure. Charles wanted to erase you, make you disappear like you never mattered. I want to build with you. I want to give you the resources to show the world what you're actually capable of when you're not being held back by small-minded men and their petty insecurities. My breath caught in my throat. 24 hours ago, I'd been a loyal employee with a steady job and a comfortable, if uninspiring, future. Now I was lying in a hospital bed being offered a chance to burn down everything I'd known and rebuild it from the ground up. What's the catch? I asked, because there's always a catch. Nobody offers you the keys to the kingdom without expecting something in return. Victor's laugh was genuinely amused. The catch is that you'd be working for me instead of Charles, which means you'd actually be expected to perform at your potential instead of being held back by corporate politics and family dysfunction. Oh, and Charles will probably hate you for the rest of his miserable life. But honestly, that sounds like a bonus from where I'm sitting. The man had a point. Charles's hatred was starting to feel less like a threat and more like a badge of honor. If Charles Whitford hated you, it probably meant you were doing something right. When would you want an answer? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. When you're ready to give one. But don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't stay open forever, and your clients aren't going to wait around while Charles scrambles to replace you with some fresh-faced MBA who thinks networking means adding people on LinkedIn. I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. In one night, I had gone from discarded to recruited, from unemployed to potentially more powerful than I'd ever been. Charles had thrown me away like garbage, and Victor wanted to turn me into a weapon. For the first time in weeks, hell, maybe years, I felt truly, genuinely powerful again. Victor, I said, opening my eyes to meet his steady gaze, I think we might have ourselves a deal. His smile could have lit up the entire hospital. Welcome to the big leagues, kid. 3 days later, I was standing in front of Summit Analytics Glass Tower headquarters, feeling like a kid on his first day at a new school, except instead of worrying about where to sit at lunch, I was about to walk into the lion's den of corporate warfare. My stitches were still pulling at my gut every time I moved wrong, and I was probably running on more coffee and spite than actual energy, but damn if I wasn't ready to burn some bridges. The building itself was everything Holstrom's dated office wasn't: sleek, modern, and expensive as hell. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the morning sun like armor, and the lobby looked like something out of a sci-fi movie where all the aliens wore $1,000 suits. It was the kind of place that whispered, "We have money and we're not afraid to spend it," in architectural form. Victor was waiting for me at the reception desk, looking completely at home in his natural habitat. Gone was the hospital gown and the slightly vulnerable air of a patient hooked up to medical equipment. This was Victor Hale in his element: sharp suit, sharper smile, and the kind of presence that made everyone in the vicinity stand up a little straighter. "Welcome to Summit," he said, extending his hand for a firm shake. "Ready to see what a real company looks like?" The dig at Charles wasn't subtle, but then again, subtlety was probably overrated when you were about to commit corporate warfare. "Lead the way, boss," I said, and the word felt strange and exciting on my tongue. Boss, not father-in-law, not the guy who'd married me off to his daughter and expected eternal gratitude in return. Just boss, clean and simple and professional. The elevator ride to Victor's office was smooth and silent, the kind of expensive quiet you only get in buildings where they don't cut corners. I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors and hardly recognized myself. 3 days ago, I'd been Charles's obedient son-in-law, staying in my lane and keeping my head down. Now I looked like someone who was about to take a sledgehammer to the status quo. Victor's office was a monument to success. Corner views of the city, furniture that probably cost more than my car, and awards lining the walls like trophies from conquered enemies. But what caught my attention was the folder sitting on his desk, thick and official-looking, with my name printed on a label that somehow made this whole insane situation feel real. "Before we go any further," Victor said, settling behind his desk like a general reviewing battle plans, "I want you to understand what you're getting into. This isn't just a job change. This is a complete reset of your professional life. Charles is going to come after us with everything he's got, and by extension, he's going to come after you personally. Your wife might not appreciate having her father as an enemy. Your friends in the industry might think you've lost your mind. Are you ready for all that?" I thought about Claire's face when she found out her dad had fired me, the shock and hurt and confusion that would probably turn into anger when she realized I was going to work for his biggest rival. I thought about the whispers in industry circles, the people who'd assume I was either brave or stupid, probably both. Then I thought about Charles's text message, still saved on my phone like evidence of a crime. "We don't need unreliable employees like you." The man had declared war first. I was just choosing my side. Charles made his position clear, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I'm not family anymore. I'm just another casualty of his ego. So yeah, I'm ready." Victor's smile was pure predator satisfaction. He opened the folder and slid it across the desk. "Then let's make this official." The contract was beautiful in its simplicity. Vice President of Client Strategy. Equity package that would make me an actual stakeholder instead of just another employee. Salary that was nearly double what Charles had been paying me. And this was the part that made my heart race: complete autonomy over client relationships and business development. "You're giving me my own division?" I asked, because surely I was reading this wrong. "You're getting exactly what you've earned," Victor replied. "The authority to do your job without some insecure middle manager looking over your shoulder, questioning every decision, and taking credit for your successes while blaming you for his failures." My hand shook as I signed the papers, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of possibility. This was it. The moment where I stopped being Charles Whitford's disappointment of a son-in-law and became my own man in the business world. That same afternoon, I made my first careful calls. Angela Torres at North Ridge Manufacturing picked up on the second ring, and I could hear the relief in her voice when I explained the situation. "Thank God," she said, and I could picture her leaning back in her office chair, the tension leaving her shoulders. "When I heard you weren't at Holstrom anymore, I was already mentally preparing to start shopping around for new representation. If you're at Summit, then we're at Summit. Simple as that. Simple as that. 7 years of relationship building, 7 years of showing up when it mattered, 7 years of proving that I was worth trusting, and it all came down to 4 words. We're at Summit. Marcus Webb at Eastmont Biotech was even more direct. Does this mean I don't have to deal with Charles's nephew anymore? He asked. Because that kid couldn't organize a one-car parade, let alone manage our account. That would be correct, I said, trying not to laugh. Outstanding. Send me the paperwork. By the end of the week, I'd fielded calls from 6 of my 9 major clients, and the conversations were all variations of the same theme. Where you go, we go. Charles's worst fears were coming true in real time, and the beautiful part was that I wasn't even trying to steal his clients. They were jumping ship on their own, like rats fleeing a sinking vessel. Friday afternoon, my phone started buzzing with calls from Holstrom's main number. Charles, no doubt, finally realizing that his dramatic firing hadn't gone according to plan. The calls kept coming, 5, 6, 7 times. Each ring felt like a small victory. I let every single one go to voicemail. Game on, Charles. Game fucking on. Charles's legal assault came faster than a bad hangover and twice as painful. By Monday morning, my inbox was flooded with enough threatening letters to wallpaper a small apartment, each one more creative in its accusations than the last. Breach of contract, theft of proprietary information, client solicitation, corporate espionage, basically everything short of crimes against humanity and bad table manners. The crown jewel of Charles's legal tantrum was a 23-page document that read like it had been written by someone who'd learned law from watching too many courtroom dramas. According to this masterpiece of legal fiction, I was apparently some kind of corporate supervillain who'd spent years systematically undermining Holstrom and Associates from within, like a business version of the Trojan horse, except with more coffee and fewer wooden horses. Jesus Christ, I muttered, scrolling through the latest accusation that I'd somehow maliciously influenced client relationships for personal gain. Yeah, Charles, because doing my job was clearly a criminal conspiracy. Next, he'd probably accuse me of aggressive competence and reckless professionalism. That's when Victor knocked on my office door. Yes, I had an office now, with actual windows and everything. Carrying what looked like his own stack of legal documents, and wearing the expression of someone who'd just been told Christmas was coming early this year. Let me guess, I said, holding up Charles's latest legal love letter. You got the special delivery too? Oh, I got more than that, Victor said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the satisfied air of a cat who'd just caught a particularly fat mouse. Charles has apparently decided that the best defense is a completely unhinged offense. He's threatening to sue us, our clients' clients, and probably anyone who's ever said hello to you in an elevator. Sounds about right. Charles never was one for proportional responses, which is why I want you to meet our head of legal counsel, Victor said, checking his watch. She should be here any minute, and trust me, you're going to love her. As if on cue, there was a sharp knock on the door, and in walked a woman who looked like she could argue with God and win. Mid-30s, sharp suit, sharper eyes, and the kind of confidence that came from winning legal battles before most people even realized there was a war going on. Priya Sharma, she said, extending her hand with a grip that could probably crush walnuts. I understand you've managed to piss off Charles Whitford so thoroughly that he's forgotten how basic contract law works. I liked her immediately. That seems to be the situation. Yeah, I said. How screwed am I? Priya's smile was the legal equivalent of a shark showing its teeth. Not even a little bit. In fact, Charles has just handed us the best possible defense on a silver platter. Want to know why? She spread Charles's legal documents across my desk like she was laying out a winning poker hand. First, he fired you without cause. That's documented in his own text message, which, by the way, is the gift that keeps on giving from a legal standpoint. Second, your clients contacted you, not the other way around. We have phone records, email timestamps, everything we need to prove you didn't solicit anyone. But what about the non-compete clause? I asked, because that had been keeping me awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I'd just painted a giant legal target on my back. The non-compete, Priya said, her grin getting wider. That's the beautiful part. Charles fired you. You didn't quit. You didn't breach your contract. He terminated your employment without cause. In most states, including this one, firing someone without cause essentially voids any non-compete agreements. Charles can't have it both ways. He can't fire you, and then claim you're still bound by employment restrictions. The relief hit me like a physical weight lifting off my chest. So all these threats are basically legal masturbation, Priya finished. Charles is throwing around big words and scary letterhead, hoping you'll get intimidated and crawl back to him begging for forgiveness. But legally speaking, he's got about as much ground to stand on as a house built on quicksand during an earthquake. Victor was practically glowing with satisfaction. It gets better. Tell him about the key person clauses. Oh, this is the really fun part, Priya said, pulling out another set of documents. See, Charles was so paranoid about losing clients that he built key person clauses into most of his major contracts. Basically, provisions that allow clients to terminate their agreements if certain essential personnel, that would be you, are no longer with the company. I stared at the documents, the implications slowly sinking in. So when Charles fired me, he basically gave his biggest clients a legal roadmap for walking away, Priya finished. It's like he wrote himself a how-to guide for destroying his own business and then followed it step by step. The cosmic justice of it all was almost too perfect. Charles's own paranoia and need for control had become the very weapons that were now being used against him. He'd been so worried about losing clients that he'd built escape hatches into his own contracts. And then he'd gone ahead and given those clients every reason to use them. What Charles thought was his strength, total control over every aspect of his business, is actually his greatest weakness, Victor said. The more he tries to control, the more he creates opportunities for everything to fall apart. So what's our strategy? I asked, because while it was nice to know we weren't completely fucked, I wanted to know how we were going to turn this whole situation to our advantage. Priya leaned back in her chair, looking like a general who'd just figured out how to win a war. We let Charles exhaust himself with legal threats while we document every single client who leaves Holstrom voluntarily. Every phone call, every email, every meeting. We create an airtight paper trail that shows these clients are making informed business decisions based on their own interests, not because of any improper solicitation on our part. And then we sit back and watch Charles implode under the weight of his own stupidity while his clients line up to work with someone who actually understands what customer service means. For the first time since this whole insane journey started, I felt like we weren't just reacting to Charles's moves. We were setting the board for our own game. And the best part? Charles had handed us all the pieces we needed to win. The next 2 weeks felt like watching a slow-motion avalanche, except instead of snow and rocks, it was Charles's entire business empire crashing down around his ears. And I had front-row seats to the best show in corporate America. It started with a trickle, a few carefully worded emails from clients asking about transition procedures and continuity of service. But by Wednesday, the trickle had become a flood, and my phone was buzzing like a caffeinated beat every 5 minutes with calls from Holstrom clients who were suddenly very interested in exploring their options. Eastmont Biotech's COO, Jennifer Walsh, didn't even bother with subtlety. Her email was so direct it could have been used as a legal document. If he's at Summit, transition us immediately. We have zero interest in working with Charles's replacement options. Meridian Logistics was equally blunt, but they went through proper channels, sending a formal letter to Holstrom's legal department that basically amounted to a corporate middle finger wrapped in professional language. They cited their key person clause, referenced my essential role in strategic planning, and demanded continuity of service, or they'd exercise their right to terminate the contract. The beautiful part was watching Charles scramble to respond. Through the industry grapevine, and let me tell you, the business world is basically high school with better suits and bigger egos. Word was getting around that Charles was calling emergency meetings, staying at the office until midnight, and generally losing his shit in spectacular fashion. But the real entertainment came on Thursday afternoon, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. "This is Sophia," said a quiet voice that sounded like it was coming from inside a bunker. Sophia Alvarez. From Holstrom. Sophia. I remembered her, project manager, sharp as a tack. One of the few people at Holstrom who actually gave a damn about doing good work instead of just kissing Charles's ass. She'd always been professional but distant, the kind of person who kept her head down and stayed out of office politics. "Sophia, hey," I said, glancing around my office to make sure no one was listening. How are things over there? Completely fucked, she said, and the profanity coming from quiet, professional Sophia was like hearing a nun drop an F-bomb. Charles has lost his mind. He's been screaming at people, firing assistants left and right. And, well, there's something you need to know. My blood went cold. What kind of something? He's been backdating records, client communications, project timelines, even some of your old emails. He's trying to make it look like you were planning this for months, that you were deliberately sabotaging client relationships to set up your move to Summit. I felt like someone had just punched me in the stomach. Are you sure? I've seen the files. He's got a whole folder of evidence that he's planning to use against you. Fabricated email chains, altered meeting notes, the works. He's basically creating a fictional narrative where you're some kind of corporate spy who was working for Victor all along. The bastard wasn't just trying to sue me. He was trying to rewrite history to make himself look like the victim. It was so typical Charles that I almost had to admire the audacity. Almost. Sophia, why are you telling me this? I asked, because while I appreciated the heads up, I couldn't figure out what was in it for her. Because I saved copies, she said, and I could hear the steel in her voice. Every original document, every unaltered file, every piece of evidence that shows what really happened. Charles thinks he's being clever, but he forgot that someone has to actually do the work of creating his fake evidence, and that someone is me. Holy shit. Sophia wasn't just giving me a warning. She was offering to be a witness. An inside source who could prove that Charles was not just lying, but actively fabricating evidence to support his lies. That's incredibly dangerous for you, I said, because it was. If Charles found out Sophia was feeding me information, he'd destroy her career without a second thought. I don't care anymore, she said, and there was a finality in her voice that told me she'd already made her decision. I've watched Charles treat people like garbage for too long. The way he fired you, the way he's trying to destroy your reputation now, it's not right. And I'm not going to be part of it anymore. After Sophia hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out at the city and trying to process what I'd just learned. Charles wasn't just fighting dirty, he was fighting insane. Fabricating evidence was beyond unethical. It was probably criminal. And if we could prove it, I called Priya immediately. Interesting, she said after I'd filled her in on Sophia's call. Very interesting. If we can document Charles's evidence tampering, we go from playing defense to having enough ammunition to blow up his entire operation. What do we need to do? We need Sophia to come in and make a formal statement. We need copies of everything she's saved. And we need to be very, very careful about how we handle this. Because if Charles catches wind of what we're doing, he'll destroy everything and probably Sophia's career along with it. That evening, Victor and I met in his office to discuss strategy. The city lights twinkled below us like a circuit board, and I couldn't help but think about how much my world had changed in just a few weeks. A month ago, I'd been Charles's obedient son-in-law, keeping my head down and playing by his rules. Now I was sitting in a rival company's headquarters, planning the systematic destruction of everything Charles had built. The cracks in his empire are widening faster than we expected, Victor said, pouring himself a scotch that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Between the client defections and now this evidence tampering, Charles is basically building his own funeral pyre. Think he'll actually go through with the lawsuit? I asked. Victor's smile was pure predator satisfaction. Oh, I hope he does. Because when he walks into that courtroom with his fabricated evidence and his righteous indignation, we're going to be waiting with Sophia's testimony and enough documentation to prove he's not just wrong, he's criminally wrong. The dominoes were falling, all right, and Charles had lined them up himself. I should have seen it coming. When you corner a desperate animal, it either runs or it attacks, and Charles Whitford had never been the running type. But even I wasn't prepared for the spectacular display of public self-destruction that went down on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning at 10:47 a.m. I was in my office, reviewing some contract details for a new client who'd jumped ship from Holstrom so fast they'd practically left skid marks, when the commotion started downstairs. At first, it sounded like normal lobby noise, the usual symphony of clicking heels, muffled conversations, and the gentle hum of corporate life. Then the volume cranked up to 11, and suddenly it sounded like someone was conducting a very angry orchestra with a bullhorn. Where is he? The voice carried all the way up to the 15th floor, cutting through Summit's usual professional calm like a chainsaw through silk. Where's that backstabbing piece of shit? I didn't need to look out the window to know who was causing the disturbance. Charles's voice was burned into my memory after 7 years of listening to him pontificate in meetings, berate employees, and generally act like he was God's gift to the business world. But this wasn't his usual controlled, corporate asshole tone. This was pure, unfiltered rage with a side of complete mental breakdown. My phone buzzed with a text from Victor. Your father-in-law is in our lobby. This should be fun. I grabbed my coffee and headed for the mezzanine that overlooked the main lobby, because there was no way in hell I was missing this show. By the time I got there, half the office had the same idea, and we were all crowded along the railing like spectators at the world's most uncomfortable gladiator match. Charles was standing in the middle of Summit's pristine lobby, looking like he'd slept in his suit and combed his hair with a blender. His face was the color of a ripe tomato, his tie was askew, and he was gesticulating wildly like a conductor leading an orchestra of pure fury. The security guards were maintaining a respectful distance, probably trying to figure out if they were dealing with a legitimate threat or just garden-variety corporate insanity. You think you can steal from me? Charles bellowed, his voice echoing off the glass walls and marble floors. 7 years I gave him. 7 years of opportunity, of guidance, of treating him like family. And this is how he repays me? Victor appeared at the top of the main staircase, moving with the calm, measured pace of someone who'd dealt with unhinged competitors before. He looked like he was about to handle a slightly annoying business meeting, not defuse a human time bomb in his lobby. Charles, Victor said, his voice carrying just enough authority to cut through the chaos. You're causing a scene. A scene. Charles whirled around to face him, and I could see the spittle flying from the mezzanine. A scene? You destroy my business, steal my employees, turn my own son-in-law against me, and you're worried about a scene? The son-in-law comment hit me like a slap. Even in his complete meltdown, Charles was still trying to play the family card, still trying to make this about personal betrayal instead of his own spectacular failure as a human being and a boss. Nobody stole anything, Victor replied, his tone maddeningly calm. Your former employee chose to work elsewhere after you terminated his employment. Your clients chose to follow him because they valued his services. These are called consequences, Charles. Perhaps you've heard of them. That's when Charles completely lost whatever remaining grip he had on reality. He's finished, he screamed, pointing up toward the mezzanine where I was standing. Hear me? Finished. I'll destroy him. I'll destroy all of you. You have no idea who you're messing with. The entire lobby had gone dead silent except for Charles's heavy breathing and the soft hum of the air conditioning. Even the elevators seemed to have stopped moving, like the building itself was holding its breath. I could see people on their phones, probably recording this train wreck for posterity, and I made a mental note to check social media later because this was definitely going viral. Security, Victor said quietly, and 2 guards moved forward with the kind of professional courtesy that barely masked their readiness to physically remove Charles if necessary. Don't you dare touch me, Charles snarled, backing toward the exit but still maintaining his aggressive posture. This isn't over. None of this is over. I'll sue you into the ground. I'll make sure none of you ever work in this industry again. And then, because the universe apparently has a sense of dramatic timing, Charles's phone started ringing. The tinny sound of his ringtone, some generic corporate melody that probably came pre-installed, cut through his tirade like a reality check delivered by AT&T. He answered it without thinking, muscle memory overriding his fury. What? He barked into the phone. Even from the mezzanine, I could hear the tinny voice on the other end, urgent and panicked. Charles's face went from red to white in about 2 seconds, and his whole body seemed to deflate like a punctured balloon. What do you mean they're pulling out? He said, his voice suddenly small and desperate. All of them. How is that? No, you listen to me. But whoever was on the other end had apparently hung up, because Charles was staring at his phone like it had just told him he had terminal cancer. The fight went out of him all at once, and for a moment, he just stood there in the middle of Summit's lobby, looking like a man who'd just watched his entire world collapse in real time. They've ruined me, he said, his voice barely audible now. You've ruined me. Victor's expression didn't change, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. No, Charles. You ruined yourself. We just gave you the rope. Charles looked up at the mezzanine, his eyes finding mine across the distance. For a moment, our gazes locked, and I saw something I'd never seen in Charles Whitford before. Complete, utter defeat. Not just professional failure, but the kind of soul-deep recognition that he'd lost everything and it was entirely his own fault. This isn't over, he said again, but the words had no strength left in them. They sounded like the last desperate gasp of a drowning man. Then he turned and walked out of Summit's lobby, his shoulders hunched and his step unsteady, looking like he'd aged 20 years in 20 minutes. From the mezzanine, I watched my former father-in-law disappear into the street, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no revenge, no sense of victory. Just the quiet realization that Charles Whitford had finally become exactly what he'd always been underneath the corporate bluster. A small, petty man who destroyed himself with his own hatred. That was the moment I knew we'd won. 3 weeks after Charles's public meltdown in Summit's lobby, I thought I'd heard the last of him. The industry grapevine had gone quiet about Holstrom and Associates, which in business terms is basically the equivalent of a death certificate. When people stop talking about your company, it means there's nothing left worth discussing. Charles had become corporate roadkill, and everyone had moved on to fresher gossip. I was working late on a Thursday night, putting the finishing touches on a proposal for a tech startup that wanted to expand into the European market when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. These days, unknown numbers usually meant headhunters trying to poach talent or journalists looking for quotes about the Holstrom situation, so I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. Call it curiosity, call it stupidity, call it the same masochistic impulse that makes you slow down to look at car accidents on the highway. Hello. Silence. Then breathing. Heavy, labored breathing like someone who'd just run a marathon or climbed 10 flights of stairs. But underneath the breathing, I could hear something else, the faint sound of ice clinking against glass. Drinking. Whoever was on the other end was definitely drinking. I know it's you, I said, because the breathing pattern was familiar, the rhythm of someone I'd listened to in countless meetings over the years. Charles. A bitter laugh that sounded like it had been dragged up from the bottom of a very deep, very dark well. Smart boy. Always were too smart for your own good. His voice was different. Rougher. The polished corporate smoothness was gone, replaced by something raw and broken. This wasn't the Charles who'd fired me via text message or the Charles who'd screamed threats in Summit's lobby. This was someone else entirely. Someone who sounded like he'd been hollowed out from the inside. What do you want, Charles? Another clink of ice, another sip of whatever he was drowning himself in. Want? That's a funny question. What I wanted was a son-in-law who understood loyalty. What I wanted was employees who respected the hand that fed them. What I wanted was a business that would last longer than my lifetime. And what you got was a reality check. What I got was destroyed. His voice cracked on the last word, and I realized with uncomfortable clarity that Charles Whitford, the man who'd ruled his corporate kingdom with an iron fist and a titanium ego, was crying. Not sobbing, not wailing, just the quiet kind of tears that come when there's nothing left to fight for. They're all gone, he continued, his words slightly slurred now. Every client, every contract, every relationship I spent 30 years building. Meridian signed with you last week. Eastmont's already moved their entire portfolio. Even the small accounts, the ones I thought were safe, they're shopping around, looking for someone who can actually deliver results instead of empty promises and family connections. I should have felt satisfaction. This was the moment I'd been working toward, consciously or not, since that text message in the hospital bed. Charles's complete professional destruction, served up on a silver platter with a side of public humiliation. But sitting there in my office, listening to a broken man catalog his losses, all I felt was tired. You did this to yourself, Charles, I said, and my voice was quieter than I'd intended. Every single decision that led to this moment was yours. Firing me, trying to fabricate evidence, losing your shit in public, none of that was forced on you. Was it? His laugh was uglier now, full of self-loathing and whiskey. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I was played from the beginning. You and Victor setting me up, manipulating me into making mistakes, pushing me until I snapped. The paranoia was still there, even in defeat. Charles couldn't accept that he'd destroyed himself through his own actions. There had to be a conspiracy, a master plan, someone else to blame for his downfall. Nobody manipulated you, I said, feeling a flash of the old anger. You fired me because you were paranoid and insecure. You tried to destroy my reputation because you couldn't stand the thought that your clients might actually prefer working with me. You fabricated evidence because you thought you could rewrite history to make yourself look like the victim. Every single self-destructive choice was yours alone. Maybe, the word came out as barely a whisper. Maybe you're right. Maybe I did this to myself. Maybe I was so worried about losing control that I guaranteed I'd lose everything. The admission hung in the air between us like a confession in an empty church. For 30 years, Charles had built his identity around being in control, being the smartest guy in the room, being the man who made the hard decisions and lived with the consequences. Now he was sitting in what I assumed was his empty office, drinking himself into oblivion and calling the man he'd tried to destroy. The board met today, he said suddenly, his voice taking on a flat, matter-of-fact tone that was somehow more devastating than his earlier emotion. Unanimous vote of no confidence. They're bringing in someone else to oversee the transition while they liquidate assets. 30 years of work, and it's all being sold off piece by piece to pay creditors. Charles, you know what the really funny part is? He was talking faster now, like he needed to get the words out before he lost his nerve. I thought I was protecting the company from people like you. People who might put personal relationships ahead of corporate loyalty, who might leave for better opportunities, who might not understand that sometimes you have to make hard choices for the greater good. And instead, I drove away the only people who actually gave a damn about doing good work. I kept the ass-kissers and the yes-men, the people who were too scared or too incompetent to threaten my position. And when the clients started leaving, all I had left were employees who couldn't tie their own shoes without a corporate manual. The ice clinked again, followed by a longer pause. When Charles spoke again, his voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear him. You could have walked away quietly, taken a job somewhere else, started over, let this whole thing blow over. But you had to humiliate me. You had to make it public, make it personal, make sure everyone in the industry knew that Charles Whitford had been beaten by his own son-in-law. I didn't make it personal, Charles. You did that when you fired me in a hospital bed. Maybe you're right, he said again, and this time the words sounded like a death sentence. Maybe you're right about all of it. The line went quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, barely audible, I'm sorry. Before I could respond, the call ended, leaving me staring at my phone in the empty office, wondering if I'd just heard Charles Whitford's final words. 6 months later, I was standing in Summit's conference room, looking out at a view that would have made Charles weep with envy, listening to Victor wrap up our quarterly review with the kind of numbers that made grown executives get misty-eyed. 47% growth in client acquisition, 62% increase in revenue from my division alone. And the cherry on top of this beautiful corporate Sunday? 3 former Holstrom clients had just signed multi-year contracts that were worth more than Charles's entire annual revenue in his best year. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, I'd been Charles's obedient son-in-law, sitting in meetings where I wasn't allowed to speak unless spoken to, watching him take credit for my work while simultaneously paranoid that I was plotting against him. Now I was running my own division, making decisions that affected millions in revenue, and actually enjoying the hell out of my job for the first time in years. Outstanding work, Victor said, closing his laptop with the satisfied click of a man who'd just watched his investment pay off in spectacular fashion. At this rate, we'll need to start discussing expansion into the West Coast market. Expansion. The word used to terrify me back in my Holstrom days, because expansion meant more responsibility, more visibility, more chances for Charles to find fault with my work and remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. Now it sounded like opportunity knocking with a sledgehammer. Priya was there too, because legal had become an integral part of our operations ever since Charles's spectacular legal implosion had taught us the value of covering our asses with military precision. The Meridian contract is locked down tight, she reported with the satisfaction of someone who'd just built an unbreachable fortress out of legal clauses. And their expansion into the Asian markets means we're looking at another 20% bump in billings. Sophia had joined us 3 months ago, after Holstrom's final liquidation had left her officially unemployed and Victor had snapped her up faster than a bargain hunter at a clearance sale. She'd brought with her not just her project management skills, but also a level of institutional knowledge about our former clients that had proven invaluable. Plus, she'd saved every single document that proved Charles's evidence tampering, which Priya kept in a legal safe like nuclear launch codes. Speaking of Meridian, Sophia said, pulling up her tablet, they want to discuss the Southeast expansion project. Apparently, their board was so impressed with our Q3 results that they're fast-tracking the timeline. It was surreal, honestly. These were the same clients who'd once been Charles's pride and joy, the accounts he'd used to demonstrate his business acumen and corporate leadership. Now they were calling us the best decision they'd ever made, praising our innovative approaches and responsiveness. The only thing that had changed was the absence of Charles's micromanagement and ego-driven decision-making. The meeting wrapped up with the usual pleasantries and scheduling of follow-ups. But Victor lingered after everyone else had left, settling into his chair with the expression of someone who had something important to discuss. "There's something I want to talk to you about," he said, and my stomach did that familiar clench that happened whenever a boss wanted to have a serious conversation. Old habits die hard. Good something or bad something. Victor's laugh was genuine, not the calculated corporate chuckle I'd grown accustomed to with Charles. "Good something. Very good something. The board has been watching your performance, and they're interested in discussing a partnership track. Equity, profit sharing, the whole 9 yards." Partnership. The word hit me like a physical force. In Charles's world, partnership was something that happened to other people, the chosen few who'd been anointed by family connection or Ivy League pedigree. It was never something that happened to state school graduates who'd worked their way up through competence and determination. Wow, I said, because sometimes the most sophisticated response is also the most honest one. That's incredible." "You've earned it," Victor said simply. "Not because you brought over Charles's clients, not because you helped us stick it to a competitor, but because you've proven that you can build something lasting. The clients who followed you didn't just want to escape Charles. They wanted to work with someone they trusted to deliver results." That evening, I drove home through traffic that would have sent Charles into a road rage spiral, but I barely noticed the congestion. My mind was spinning with possibilities, with the kind of future that I'd never dared to imagine when I was trapped in Charles's corporate hierarchy. Claire was waiting for me in the kitchen, and I could tell from her expression that she'd been thinking about something all day. We'd had our rough patches after the whole Charles situation exploded. It's not easy watching your husband systematically destroy your father's business empire, even when your father absolutely deserved it. "Sophia called," she said without preamble. "She wanted to thank you for the recommendation letter. Apparently, the nonprofit she's interviewing with was impressed." Sophia had decided that corporate consulting wasn't her calling after all. Watching Charles's meltdown had convinced her that she wanted to work somewhere that actually helped people instead of just moving money around. It was a good choice for her, and I was glad I could help. "She's good people," I said. "She deserves to be somewhere that appreciates what she brings to the table." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you regret it? Going against my father?" It was a question she'd asked before, in different ways, usually late at night when the weight of family drama felt heaviest. And every time, my answer got a little clearer, a little more certain. "No," I said, and I meant it completely. Because loyalty only matters when it's mutual. Charles broke it first when he decided that family meant I owed him everything and he owed me nothing. When he fired me in that hospital bed, he made it clear that I was never really family. I was just another employee he could dispose of when convenient. She nodded, and I could see the relief in her eyes. "I think I'm finally okay with that. With all of it. He made his choices, and you made yours." Later that night, lying in bed and listening to Claire's steady breathing beside me, I thought about Charles's final phone call. I'd never heard from him again after that broken, whiskey-soaked conversation, and the industry grapevine suggested he'd quietly disappeared from the business world altogether. Some said he'd moved to Florida. Others claimed he was teaching business classes at a community college somewhere in the Midwest. Nobody really knew, and honestly, nobody really cared. When I thought back to that hospital bed where this whole crazy journey had started, I no longer saw weakness or vulnerability. I saw the moment I was reborn, not as Charles's son-in-law, not as his employee, not as someone who owed his success to family connections and corporate politics, but as my own man. And the beautiful irony? Charles thought he'd buried me that day with that text message, thought he'd kicked me when I was down and taught me a lesson about knowing my place. Instead, he'd buried himself and set me free.